Okay, so good morning all, and welcome back to our third session of this 1 month internship, project-based internship program, where we are going to understand today the large language models and the generative AI. Now, as part of the project, you will be using the Solive tool, which will help you to generate the scientific prompt, and those scientific prompt you will be using to put in large language model. Now, as discussed earlier, that the process is important, but simultaneously the outcome, the data which you got, has to be utilized by the researcher, by the scientist, by the interns, and the interpretation need to be done. So it is very important that you understand that how the large language model works. I hope that you can hear me properly and the voice is fine. Just can someone put that in the chat as a comment so that will I will get to know that the voice is fine. Hello. Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you. Thank you for confirming. So I'm just going to share. Okay, so I'm sure that you can see my PPTs. So as mentioned earlier, that we need to understand these large language models. So one of the question which was there yesterday from the audience, that which model is good for me. It all depend on your research question. It all depend on how good you actually design the prompt, and that's why we, before understanding the large language model, we understand that how to actually design the prompt. So it all depend on the question. So it is actually already like been utilized by many pharma companies in clinical research and also in the administrative area to you know as an assistant, so that way it can be um, used uh, in the project of healthcare or in the pharma, which will create the meaningful value for their project. So in today's session, uh, we will be looking at the uh, fundamentals of the large language models, that what actually it is and how it works, then their capacity and the limitations, where LLM is excel and where they can actually be used and where the precaution need to be taken, then the research application, so where it can be utilized and how we have utilized in Swan Life, that we will be discussing, and the major part which we mentioned from the beginning, that ethical point of view, how you need to adopt them responsibly. So the fundamentals, that what LLMs are and how they are utilized in healthcare. So we will go through that. So what is the large language model? So large language models are artificial intelligence which are trained on a quantity of the text which can be utilized to predict and also generate human like language. So you need to understand that it has been the data has been used in the text format to actually train the model. So there is GPTs are there, cloud is there, perplexity, imperplexity, sonar model is there, Gemini is there. All these are the model. MedPalm is actually Google's only Gemini model, which can actually learn the statistical patterns across different words and from the books and the articles. So again, Gemini can be utilized to access them. So LLM does not understand the text the way actually the researcher, the scientist, or the clinician does, but it helps to predict the most probable next word or the outcome of the content. So it has got a simple mechanism, and it actually does that with very fast and remarkable way. So if you look at the summarizing of the literature, the answers, questions, it can do it in a in a manner, and it will be in a faster way, and can create a structural document. So as I discussed yesterday about having the structural prompt, it actually creates that. So when we look at LLM generating language, it is a training, tokenization, and then based on that, it predict and generate the content, which actually happens in very fast way in millisecond, and it can repeat word by word till actually you get the response. Definitely, uh, I'm sure that those who are actually attending, everyone must have used this LLM, that is the ChatGPT, Gemini, which in some quantity is freely available. So definitely you must be using. But with the free, the quality of the outcome um, is again not the same when you are actually using the paid one. So it totally depend on the quality of the prompts and the training data. So based on that, you will get the information. So when we look at the scale behind the models, there are about 175 billion parameters. So it is a typically scale for the large frontier model with a training data of 45 terabytes of the text content in about more than 100 plus language. So it is actually in extraordinary scale and with numbers of parameters. So you can see that whenever you are putting the content, any information, it will definitely give you the answer because it is predicting and then it is generating. So generative, we are going to talk about the um, generative AI in the next part of this session, because we have divided this session into understanding large language models and the generative AI. So the limitation and capability. So the strength and the cautions which we need to take. Some we did discuss yesterday, but let look at the strength and the cautions. So whenever you are using it, LLMs are very good at summarizing the lengthy literature. It can be general research or it can be clinical research, and it is doing it in rapidly format. So with notebook LLM you can do with video as well. So videos, audios, text, they can actually summarize them. Drafting and editing of the research document can be done with the LLMs. Then extracting the structural data from the unstructural notes. So if you have text format information, it can put into a structural data. So you can create dashboards of different information which is there to understand the data, with very simple manner. You can do that. Then answering the domain question in natural language. So previously, a lot of the time you needed to code so that way you can get the answer. But now with the natural language information, you can actually get the domain answer, and it can translate across languages and the reading level. So if you are creating a content, scientific content, let's say you are doing scientific communication blogs, you can put them into not only in English, but you can put them in regional Indian language simultaneously, or regional European language as well, or any other languages as well. So that is going to now make the research been accessed by different community. Now, with this, the cautions also comes. So, one of the cautions which we discussed yesterday is the hallucination, which is actually fabricating the content because the model is a generative model, and if it's not connected with the web search or if you're not using the paid model of this, then there will be fabrication of the data and hallucinations will be produced. But always using models like Perplexity, Cloud some point, Gemini some point actually gives you if they're connected with the web. Perplexity always give the content, maximum content from the literature which is cited in the in the output. So still hallucination is there, and you need to have the person who can actually the expert who can actually make sure that the not taking the false fact in the content. And sometimes the knowledge cut off. So with the ChatGPT, previously it was trained till 2021. So anything which is after published after 2021 was difficult to access. So something like that, uh, you will have difficulty in accessing the content based on the training material which is given to the model. Biases can be there based on the training data. Then verification of clinical accuracy can be an issue, and that's why many companies are producing, using the models and producing the tools which can be utilized only for the project which they are doing with the models. Privacy risk is there, and that is again a major thing which need to be handled when you are working with clinical patient data or even with the information which is important to maintain the confidentiality. So LLM output should always be reviewed by the qualified professionals. You cannot actually with the tool just develop the content and it can be given to the general public to access it. It has to be reviewed by a qualified professionals uh, before taking any informative research decision or the clinical decision. Now, this is again a precautionary measures. It doesn't mean that all the content which has been produced by the LLMs can actually cause issues. Maximum content is fine, but you need to have the qualified professionals. And we have done this from 2020. We are actually working on different models and have been reviewed, and then based on that, we come to the models which are useful for our research application purpose. So now, in what research application can LLMs will be used? So with the faculty, with the student who already have used the LLMs for review the literature purpose and also the drafting of the many of your project or the literatures. But when we look, the research across many different divisions, literature review, which is actually again synthesizing content of paper. It can be annotations of genes, annotations of pathways, annotations of different proteins can be done with the large language model, which will help to understand the key finding from the article and also to get the gap between the research. Now, this was previously was a time consuming because manually was done with limited literature. But now with the LLMs, you can actually have both. You can use directly the LLM, or you can develop a tool where it can annotate based on what you are targeting. You can do that as well. So literature. We have developed a tool called BioAnnotate, where we can actually upload numbers of article in certain area, and then it will annotate and show us different genes, proteins, and different pathways. So that way we can understand where the molecules are working or what type of genes are being involved in the disease. So that can be possible. So it's not only like putting the prompt in the large language model. You can put a prompt to develop a tool, and that tool can be used only for your purpose, for your research purpose. Second is the clinical documentation, where you can create Now, when we are talking about clinical documentation, it can be for the patient who are already in the hospital. So, discharge summaries, then clinical notes can be done, which will actually help in reducing the administrative work. So, now this again goes into the patient, but actually, clinical trials like phases trial can also be utilized to design the protocol, understanding inclusion exclusion criteria, understanding the stats which need to be used in the clinical study. And the third is the data extraction, where converting free text according to the structural. That is what I mentioned earlier, that you can create the dashboard of the text content, so that way it will give you more clarity about the data from your literature studies or clinical study. In case of solar biotech, we are already using in these areas, but simultaneously, as I mentioned earlier, the tools have been developed into certain areas. Like if we are working on skincare products, we have got tool for predictive medicine, for clinical studies, for that skincare, also for literature. As I mentioned earlier, bioannotation tool we have developed, so that way we can feed the the tool with our articles about that project, and we can have the annotation done, so that way we can have faster information about hypothesis and the gap which is there, or even the mechanism of that molecule. Now, when you are adopting this framework, you need to understand that when LLMs are used into healthcare research, it is completely dependent on the discipline of the government. So there are got four pillars which you need to keep in mind. That is the transparency, document use, and the limitation. So when you are using the document, there should be transparency that the articles which have been peer reviewed are being utilized to create something. If you are using the generative, it is going to increase the content which can be a generative content, and that need to be validated with the trusted source. So let's say, for example, if you're working on an idea, which when you are trying to use the LLMs, there should be always first LLM should be perplexity, because it gives the citation, it actually gives you the reference. You can use ChatGPT Cloud, the paid one, where you got the deep research, which also got the articles. You need to make sure that you are connecting the content which has been in the public domain with the literature. So you are validating the trust source of that content. And the third is that you need to make sure that the content which is been given by the LLM has been overviewed by the researcher, by the scientist, by the clinician. So then only you should bring that into the public domain. Otherwise, what is going to happen? It can be a generative content. And the last one, from the clinical point of view, from the research point of view, data privacy is very important. So patient information need to be protected when you are adopting the large language model. You shouldn't actually upload the patient details with the case study on the LLMs, um, because it can then create the issue with the data privacy, patient information. You can have a tool, you can take the concern of the patients, and you can do it, but when the concerns have been taken for that purpose, then only you can do it. So major key takeaway from the large language model part is that they are the predictive tools. You should make sure that the generated language are judged by the human, because they actually are very powerful, and got a content which is relevant to what you are doing, can definitely help you move faster with your project. LLM accelerate the reviews, the documentation, the data task. So it is going to help you with that part. So it is going to free your time for high value work. So that is second thing. And the third thing is again privacy is important. Validation, then transparency of the content is very important. So it should be deployed only when it has been overseen by the expert and the content is then utilized for the further study. So this was the first part of this session where we discuss about what LLMs are, how they can be utilized in the research. Now, part of the LLM is the generative AI, where that is what you are actually going to do in your project with the help of the large language models. You will be designing the research and designing the content. That content is the data which you will be then utilize for your uh, you know uh, internship. But when you are doing that, it will be the generative AI, which normally all the large language models give when you ask the question. So generative AI is very important to understand because it is changing that how biomedical innovation or translational science, even the clinical discoveries are happening and how they are utilizing them in those all three areas. So as I mentioned that there is a shift happening in the discovery with the help of the large language model, mainly the generative AI models, because they are capable of producing novel text, images, molecular structures, synthesizing the data. And synthesizing the data is that what we will be doing in the internship, due to which it actually have moved from the theoretical promise to practical research tool. We have already done that with the help of the data from the large language models. We have created the formulations and they are into the market as well and they are performing well. So based on we are connecting AI with the products and that there where the predictive and precision areas are developing. So these models are not just generating, but they are also helping to bring the novel formulation in the market. So the core idea is that machines will synthesize the creditable data and design the hypothesis so that way we can learn the pattern across the different areas of the research. So this is happening due to there is an increase in these large language models, then increase in the digitalized health record. Again, with developing countries like India and other developing countries, digital health record is difficult, but still there are different ways where the digital records are being stored and that are being utilized. So one of the example is the insurance companies. Many people who have bought insurance, that data can be utilized by the government or the industries for the research purpose. But in developed countries like UK, European countries, even US, uh, the data of the patient or the person in the countries are easily available and it has been already utilized in basic research and also for the clinical research. Then the third thing is that there is a reduction in cost per experiment because when you are designing the experiment using the AI, you are trying to minimize, and there is a lot of other things which are involved can be reduced due to the involvement of this experiment which we design using the computer. And then there are many institutes now they are connected. Connectively growing due to this AI and the discovery relevant to basic research and biomedical can be possible, and that's why the uh, large language model need to be understand. And the three types of this large language model. So one type we're looking today is the generative AI, but then there is a RAG, that is the retrieval augmenting generative AI, that is the model of perplexity where connect directly to the references. And third is the agentic AI, where you can. I showed you yesterday that we have created a agentic AI tool which actually connects information the, the query and it gives you based on the agent gives you different types of content which is relevant to the project. So the first model, that is the generative AI, it is actually help in multi-stage research cycle from generating easily the hypothesis to clinical transition. So in the drug discovery, it can help in designing the candidates. Now, based on what you are working, so in case of solar, we are working on small molecules from plants. So we are understanding that what molecules can have been utilized for different type of diseases that we are targeting. So we are looking in chemo prevention of the cancers. We are looking in skincare and nutraceuticals. So we are utilizing candidate for that. But any companies who are working with synthetic or even with the small molecule, molecules, they can actually design those molecules using the AI. So that way, they can be optimized for binding affinity before actually going for wet lab. Previously, there was already in silico and pharmacophore modeling, but again, the limitations of the data which is available only on those tools from the databases was difficult to take it further. But now with the AI, the databases are connected simultaneously. The capability of the generative AI to predict and generate can actually give you the molecule. Now, that molecule falling in the rule of five and all the things then need to be considered. And for that purpose, there will be the expert, professional expert will be there, and they will be taking it further. It is already utilized. Many companies they have already have molecules now in the clinical studies as well. The second is literature synthesis. You are going to utilize thousands of paper, going to get structural evidences from those paper, so that way you can build the connection between the different molecules, pathways, diseases. So we can utilize for that synthetic data as well, generating the privacy preserving patient core, so that way you can have the augment scarce or imbalanced data sets by doing the synthetic data. And the fourth one is the trial designing, where you can design the protocol. I told you earlier that you can actually have inclusion exclusion criteria decided with the generative AI. Also, you will decide on the flexibility of the recruitment of the people. In our case, we are working on decentralized observational clinical research. Different clinical researches are available. We will be discussing in the clinical trial, clinical research internship. In that, we have got total eight types of the clinical trials, and that can be designed using the generative AI. So this actually help in accelerating the drug discovery mentioned earlier by generating the molecules. So it can be utilizing for chemistry purpose, where the molecule was taking weeks, months, can be now produce viable molecule using a couple of hours. But definitely, you need to look into the chemical spaces and understand that does actually this molecule can actually give the effect of drug-like molecules, can it be narrowed down so that way the poor candidate can be removed at the stage where before moving into wet lab you can do that. And there are several companies, as I said earlier, which has used the generative AI drug candidate and now are in the early stage of the clinical trials. So the potential of this generative AI, we can see that it has been already utilizing hypothesis development, which can be done very faster. So potential, there is a an acceleration happen at the early stage drug discovery, where the candidates are generated and the team can go for the hypothesis development. There is a time reduction, and that is about 50%. I will say more than that now, because the models are getting trained in the literature review and the synthesis of the content from the literature. The major core models which are actually useful in the generative AI are the text, molecular, and imaging generation now, which actually helps in the research pipeline. So it is very useful and encouraging area with the generative AI, that we can actually use that into the research purpose for rigorous peer review validation, and for clinical claim as well, like designing the clinical trials and for the inclusion exclusion criteria. So there is a promise which is leading towards the practice due to this generative AI, and methodologies have already been utilized where defined questions are giving the generative output, which is then validated with the result, and then that is translated to evidences. So with the project also in the internship, we are giving you the title of the project, that is the defined question. With that, you are going to generate the output using the scientific prompts which are generated through the tool, and the generated outcome will be from the large language model. You will be then validating those results, and those validated results are then taken into the as a evidence into the study. So generative outputs are not going to be the end point. The end point is after the validation by the professional expert, and there where you are actually learning from this project that AI assisted hypothesis must pass through the rigorous validation from the expert review, and then it can be taken into the clinical or in the translational decision. So now, when we are looking at the synthetic data that can be from literature or from the clinical point of view, there are benefit and risk as well. So you need to understand that in the benefit there is a privacy preservation. It enables open data sharing, then augment rare disease scoring, and also reduce the recruitment bottleneck. But when we look at the benefit, the risk are that it embed biases. There are chances that increasing the biases. Then the real gap in the data cannot be understand. False confidence claim can be done due to the underpowered study. And the major issue which is there with the risk is that regulatory uncertainty. So when you are actually synthetic using synthetic data, patient data, it can be useful for compelling some of the answers, but the challenges are very important to understand, and you need to make sure that when you are deploying the methodology, you are understanding the benefits and the risk of this. And that's why uh, with the question, with the LLM output, the third step which we have, that is the validation by keeping the human in the loop. And that's why when you are using the three AI model also, that is the major automated agentic AI also, still you need to have the expert, professional expert from that area, who will be making sure that the content which has been uh, utilized from the AI is relevant to what actually is expected. So, for example, AI can propose candidate. It can give you hypothesis. It can give you summary, or even it can design the synthesis. But then the researcher need to make sure that they look at the output from the AI, so that there are no any credibility issues, no biases, or no clinical relevance matters in that information. So that way, uh, once it is validated, it can be utilized for the promising direction of the studies. It can be basic research, it can be preclinical or clinical studies. So major risk which we need to keep in mind, which we have continuously discussed and talked about. One is the hallucination. Second is the biases, where the data can be based on the training model. It can have biases. The third one is the reproducibility. That is where we actually created our tools. So, as I mentioned earlier, when you are using AI, it is not only using directly the model, but also making sure that when you are using the model, the content which is being created should be have reproducibility, and it will based on that only can create the scientific trust. So that is important that the content which is being generated should actually be audited and significant methodology challenges can be reduced, and this all risk need to be keep in mind when you are working with the generative AI. Again, when we looked at the risk factors of the clinical data synthesis, I mentioned about the regulatory, because the regulatory frameworks are very important when you are working with your research project and also with pharma or healthcare product. So when we are starting with our project at Swalive, we don't start with literature review first. We actually look into the regulatory and the clinical part. As we are taking the product into the commercial area, we are not interested, or we are still putting them in the public domain in the form of the publication and patent. But the major part is that the product need to be utilized by the patient, by the people, and that's why it is very important to understand the regulatory and the clinical of that, the disease or the molecules which we want to work. So agencies from different countries need to be studied, so that way transparency, validation, and also what the requirement of agencies are can be taken care when you are working with the AI based content and the tools. So when you are creating using anything with the AI, regulatory is very important and it has to be followed with the ethical manner. So that is one of the important thing when you are working with large language model and the generative AI. So when we look at the road ahead, it is very important to understand the stages where the research is now getting maturated. Is that experimentation, there is no options for experiment. Data is important. So you need to understand the low risk literature and ideal task can be done with the AI, but the experimentation need to be, the data need to be generated, which is need of the AI. Then the second is validation of that data, so that way you can actually make sure that you are not just using the generative content from the AI. Integration of the workflow with the governance and with the audit trial. So that is what I mentioned earlier, the uh, regulatory and the ethical point where you should develop the trust. And the last one is the translational impact, which will be created with the help of the regulatory grade validation. That is the registering with the regulatory bodies. So when you bought the product in the market, that means you have followed all the regulatory requirement of the content. So the key takeaway from the generative AI is that you need to treat the models, the AIs, the large language model, as your collaborator, which can help you to expand your research by developing the hypothesis, which can be useful, and that will be supervised by you. That is the validation. So every generated content should be actually tested to make sure that you, that content which has been given can be utilized in the research, so that the informed decision can be taken. And the third is the trust, that is the governance, that is the build document should be actually ethically and non-biased. It has been reviewed and audited, so that the research design and also the end of the research publication can be done in the form of the article, patents, or to the regulatory body. So these are the some of the key takeaways with generative AI, which is one of the powerful model of the AIs. And then tomorrow we will be discussing about RAG AI, that is the retrieval augmenting generative AI, which is a model in Perplexity where you can search the questions and it give you the content, but it also give you the references from where the contents are there. Still, you need to make sure that the content which it has given, the article which has been cited, are actually already available there. So you're not, just using like that. So augmented models are important. And the third one is the agentic AI. With the agentic AI, all the process, where the supervisions are also there, can be done by the AI. But again, as I mentioned, at the end, when the draft is ready, the draft I showed you yesterday, you still have to have the supervision from the expert, so that way you are making sure that the content which has been given by the large language models are not just the generative one. So thank you for attending the today's session on large language model and the generative AI. If you have any question, I'm happy to answer. So tomorrow, that is on Thursday, we will be talking, as I mentioned, about the RAG and the generative AI. So it will give you more about the models and more about what type of uh, content I can get from the large language model. Simultaneously, as I told you, that based on your research, based on what you are utilizing the LLMs, the models will be decided. So you need to work out with them that what which one can be utilized. So the students who are part of the internship. So just to clarify, I got WhatsApp messages. The link is already there on YouTube. You need to make sure that you go again on Swalife Academy, and the link is there. That is the first place. The second is that you are registered on Graphy. The platform has got the link. You can join from there as well. So instead of sending WhatsApp messages to find out about the link, uh, this is today is the third day. We already couple of days we have shared the link, reminded you, but it has been now made sure that it you got everything there. So instead of putting the message on WhatsApp, directly look into the Graphy platform where you are registered and you. Okay, so that is one thing I wanted to mention. Okay, so if there are no any questions with this session, I will end the stream. If you have any question, you can always put in the comments below this video. Thank you.